It started with a smell. Not the kind you can ignore, the kind that seeps under doorways and clings to walls until someone has no choice but to find out what's rotting behind it. On a humid August afternoon in southwest Baltimore, a maintenance worker unlocked the door to apartment 1106 at Coventry Homes after several neighbors complained about a foul odor filling the hallway. Inside, the air was heavy, the kind of thick, sour heat that only comes when life has already left the room. And what he found inside would change the community forever. Lying face down in a sleeping bag was 8-year-old Davin Thomas, a kitchen knife still lodged in his chest. Just a few feet away, in the bathtub, was his little sister, 6-year-old Neria Thomas, with a fabric belt still tied around her neck. Both had been dead for days. Their toys were still scattered across the floor, their drawings taped to the fridge. But the laughter that once filled that small apartment had been replaced by silence. At first, police thought it was a double homicide by an unknown intruder. But it didn't take long to realize. The killer was someone who should have loved them the most. Their mother. Welcome to the True Crime Shadow, where we uncover the real stories that hide behind the headlines. Stories that haunt investigators, devastate families, and reveal how fragile the line between love and destruction can be. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because in this corner of the world, truth has a way of hiding where the light doesn't reach. Tonight, we step inside a case that left an entire city asking one impossible question. How does a mother who fought so hard to regain custody of her children end up taking their lives? This is the story of Jamerria Hall, the Baltimore mother who lost everything. To most people, apartment 1106 was just another unit in the aging red brick complex of Coventry Homes, a quiet stretch of southwest Baltimore where residents kept mostly to themselves. Rent was low, neighbors rotated often, and the sounds of children playing in the courtyard were the only reminders that life still flickered in those tired buildings. Inside that apartment lived 28-year-old Jamerria Hall and her 2 children, Davin and Neria Thomas. To outsiders, they looked like any ordinary family trying to make it through the week. Davin, an energetic 8-year-old with a gentle spirit, loved to chase the neighborhood cats and ask strangers if he could pet their dogs. His little sister Neria, just 6, was a burst of light in a place that rarely saw much sunshine. She greeted everyone with a smile, the kind that softened even the toughest faces in the neighborhood. Neighbors would often see the kids walking hand in hand to the corner store or sitting on the front steps sharing snacks. They were polite, friendly, always laughing. Those kids were beautiful, one neighbor later said, always happy to see you, always saying hello. But their mother? That was a different story. Jamerria kept to herself. She barely spoke to anyone, and when she did, it was short and detached, as if every word took effort. She was often seen sitting alone in her car, sometimes for hours, just staring into the night. The windows fogged, the engine off, and her expression unreadable. Neighbors started to notice her withdrawing more as summer went on. Some described her as lost. Others said she looked disconnected, like her body was there, but her mind was somewhere far away. There were moments she seemed to be talking to herself, pacing in the parking lot with her phone in her hand, not making a call, just whispering. Inside that small 2-bedroom apartment, things were unraveling in ways no one could see. Teachers later reported the children had started missing school more frequently. When they did show up, they were quiet, distant, sometimes exhausted. Their homework came incomplete, their smiles faded. A woman who lived directly below the family said she heard things. Furniture scraping, muffled arguments, objects hitting the floor. Sometimes, late at night, she heard crying. She thought about calling someone, but she didn't. I didn't want to interfere, she said later. You never know what's going on in people's homes. Behind those closed doors, The distance between Jamerria and the rest of the world was growing by the day. She'd stopped calling relatives, changed phone numbers constantly, and cut ties with almost everyone who had once tried to help her. Family later said she was building walls around herself and those kids. Nobody realized just how dangerous that isolation would become. The signs were there, the silence, the withdrawal, the change in her eyes, but no one connected the dots. And yet, this darkness didn't begin in that apartment. Years earlier, there had already been fire, literal fire, that should have warned everyone of what was coming next. 3 years before the murders that would shock Baltimore, Jamerria Hall had already given the world a glimpse of the storm brewing inside her mind. It was 2018, and what began as another tense day at home ended with flashing lights, smoke, and sirens. According to court records, Jamerria had grown increasingly unstable in the weeks leading up to that day. Neighbors said they could hear her arguing with herself, pacing around her home, muttering things no one could quite understand. Then one afternoon she snapped. Inside her own house, with Davin just 5 years old and Neria only 3, Jamerria set multiple fires. Investigators later found that she'd used household chemicals as accelerants, lighting the flames in several spots throughout the home. Smoke began to fill the rooms where her children played. The fire alarms had been disabled. By some miracle, both children survived. Neighbors smelled the smoke, called 911, and firefighters arrived just in time to pull them out. The 2 were treated for minor smoke inhalation, but otherwise unharmed. Jamerria was arrested on the spot. When questioned, she first denied starting the fire. But later, after hours in custody, she admitted it. She claimed she'd been overwhelmed, paranoid, and convinced that something or someone was trying to harm her and her children. The next day, before anyone could fully assess how serious her mental state was, she vanished with both kids. Authorities scrambled to find them, issuing an urgent alert that spread across Baltimore. For 2 days, nobody knew where they were. Then, finally, staff at Johns Hopkins Hospital recognized Jamerria from news reports. She had checked herself into the psychiatric emergency unit with her children in tow. When doctors evaluated her, they noted she was hearing voices and suffering from paranoid delusions. She believed her family was being targeted. For a brief moment, it seemed like the system had caught her, like maybe this time, someone would help her before she broke again. She was hospitalized, evaluated, and eventually convicted of first-degree arson. Her punishment? 1 year in jail. 1 year for setting fire to her home with her children inside. When she was released, the mental health follow-up was minimal. A few meetings, a few check-ins, nothing consistent. No long-term treatment plan. No supervision beyond standard parole conditions. And when her year was up, life simply moved on. The case file closed. The kids were living with relatives. And Jamerria Hall, a woman with a violent history and a diagnosed psychiatric breakdown, was free again. The fire should have been a warning, a loud, undeniable signal that something was seriously wrong. But in the years that followed, it would be treated like a bad mistake instead of a red flag. And in 2019, she'd returned to court, not as a suspect, but as a mother asking for her children back. By 2019, just a year after finishing her sentence for arson, Jamerria Hall was standing before a family court judge in Baltimore, asking for a second chance, not for herself, but for Davin and Neria. She'd been out of jail for only a few months when she filed her petition to regain full custody. On paper, it looked like a redemption story. She'd completed anger management classes. She'd secured housing at Coventry Homes, a government-assisted complex known for taking in struggling parents. She told the court she was getting therapy and taking her medication regularly. To an overworked judge with a mountain of cases on the docket, she looked like progress, a mother trying to rebuild her life. But behind the paperwork, there were voices, not the ones she claimed to hear, but the ones of her own family, begging the court to reconsider. Her relatives warned that she wasn't stable, that she'd stopped taking her medication, that the paranoia had come back. They told anyone who would listen that the children might not be safe if they returned to her care. Their pleas went unheard. The court sided with Hall. The judge, whose name was later withheld from public record, ruled that she had met the conditions for reunification. The state's Child Protective Services signed off too, citing her compliance and stability. There was no psychiatric reevaluation, no long-term supervision plan, no follow-up mental health mandate. The decision effectively erased every warning that had been written into her past. The fire, the hospital stay, the hallucinations, the escape with her kids. All of it was treated as history. And so, Davin and Neria went home. For a brief time, it seemed like maybe things had changed. Hall took pictures with the kids, posted occasional photos online, even smiled in a few. But those who knew her said the darkness never really went away. It just went quiet. Experts who later reviewed the case called the custody ruling a catastrophic failure. One child welfare analyst put it bluntly: setting fire to your home with your children inside isn't a parenting mistake. It's a psychological emergency. The system treated it like a bad decision. The 2019 reunification should have been handled with caution, constant supervision, and mental health oversight. Instead, it became a forgotten case file, one of many buried under the endless paperwork of a system stretched too thin. In hindsight, the path toward tragedy was already laid out, step by step, signature by signature. By the summer of 2021, Jamerria Hall had everything she'd said she wanted. Her home, her freedom, her children. But the mind that had once convinced her that danger was everywhere was whispering again. And this time, no one was watching closely enough to stop what was coming. August 2021 began like any other hot summer month in southwest Baltimore. The air was heavy, the streets quiet, and the hum of cicadas filled the nights outside Coventry homes. To anyone passing by, apartment 1106 seemed normal, just another home in a building that had seen its share of struggles. Security cameras later recovered from the complex showed Jamerria Hall returning home with Davin and Neria on August 2nd. The children carried small shopping bags, their faces bright, their laughter echoing faintly through the footage. It would be the last time anyone captured them smiling. As the month went on, things started to change. Neighbors said they noticed Hall sitting in her parked car late at night, sometimes until 3 a.m., engine off, windows rolled up, her body still as stone. When someone waved, she didn't respond. It was as if she couldn't even see them. One neighbor described her eyes as empty, like nobody was home. By mid-August, her behavior grew increasingly erratic. The complex's maintenance supervisor recalled encountering her one afternoon while fixing a nearby plumbing issue. She was anxious, talking rapidly, insisting that people were watching her apartment. When he tried to calm her, she just turned and walked away mid-sentence. The last known sighting of Davin and Neria alive came on August 19th around 4:30 p.m. Surveillance footage captured the three of them entering the building. Davin lagged behind, clutching a small toy. Neria held a stuffed animal close to her chest, keeping unusually close to her brother. Hall didn't make eye contact with anyone. She moved quickly, almost rushing them inside. Later that night, the quiet routine of the neighborhood was broken by sounds no one would ever forget. Around 11:30 p.m., a neighbor named Ray Cherry, who lived in the unit above, woke to the sound of crying. Then a scream. He pressed his ear to the floor, certain he heard a child's voice. "Mommy, no! Mommy, no!" Then silence. He waited, unsure what to do. Maybe it was just a bad argument, he thought. Maybe they'd settled down. He didn't call the police. He went back to bed. That moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. Over the next few days, neighbors began noticing something else. A strange, heavy smell started leaking from the vents. It crept into the hallway, clung to the carpet, and grew worse with each passing hour. Some thought it was garbage. Others assumed an animal had died inside the walls. Meanwhile, Jamerria Hall was nowhere to be seen. On August 21st, just 2 days after the children's last sighting, their father, Davin Thomas Sr., saw Hall walking near North Avenue and Bloomingdale Road, about 3 miles away from Coventry Homes. She was screaming at no one, cursing at the air, her eyes wild and unfocused. When he pulled over and asked, "Where are the kids?" she didn't answer. Instead, she began yelling about people trying to poison her food, then ran off between buildings. He tried calling her for days after that, but she never picked up. By August 23rd, the odor from apartment 1106 was unbearable. One tenant finally reported it to building management, saying, "It smells like something died in there." The next day, maintenance supervisor Mr. Johnson was sent to check it out. When he unlocked the door, the truth spilled into the hallway like the stench itself, a truth that would devastate an entire community. When Mr. Johnson, the building's maintenance supervisor, unlocked the door to apartment 1106 on the morning of August 24, 2021, he thought he was walking into another tenant's forgotten mess, maybe spoiled food, maybe a pest problem. But the moment the door opened, he froze. The air that hit him was heavy and rancid, a smell so thick and sour it stuck to his clothes instantly. He stepped back, covered his mouth, and instinctively reached for his phone. But curiosity, or duty, pulled him one step inside. And that's when he saw it. Just a few feet from the doorway lay 8-year-old Davin Thomas, face down in a sleeping bag on the living room floor. A large kitchen knife protruded from his chest. A plastic trash bag was pulled tightly over his head. His small hand was still clutching the edge of the sleeping bag, as if he had tried to push himself up. Johnson stumbled backward, choking on the smell, and ran out of the apartment. He called 911, his voice shaking as he told the dispatcher, there's a child dead in there." When police arrived minutes later, they secured the scene. Inside, officers found a second body, 6-year-old Neria Thomas, lying in the bathtub. A length of fabric, later identified as a belt, was wrapped around her neck. Both children had been dead for several days. Detective Sarah Rosenberg, the lead investigator on scene, later said it was one of the hardest scenes she'd witnessed in 20 years. "The children's backpacks were still hanging by the door," she said. "There were coloring books on the table, school papers on the fridge. Everything was frozen in time, except them. But there was something missing from that apartment. Their mother. Jamerria Hall was gone. Her purse wasn't there. Her phone was off. No car in the lot. It was as if she'd evaporated." Police quickly identified her as the prime suspect and issued a citywide alert. Detectives started combing through phone records, surveillance footage, and bus routes. They interviewed family members, including Hall's mother, Brenda Hall, who revealed something chilling. Just days earlier, Jamerria had called her, claiming she was in the hospital for an emergency surgery and that the children were with their father. It was all a lie, a calculated story to buy herself time. Then came the break investigators were waiting for. On August 25th, less than 24 hours after the bodies were discovered, Hall's phone briefly reconnected to a cell tower near Philadelphia Road in Baltimore County. Police flooded the area, and within hours, they found her hiding behind a dumpster outside a convenience store. She looked disheveled, exhausted, and detached. Her clothes were dirty, her hair unkempt. She wasn't combative, just eerily calm. When officers approached, she didn't run. She simply said, "I know why you're here." At Baltimore Police Headquarters, She was read her rights and placed in an interrogation room. Detectives expected resistance, maybe denial, maybe tears. But Jamerria didn't hesitate. She waived her right to an attorney and began to talk. What came next was a confession that even the most hardened investigators struggled to process. Her tone was flat, emotionless, like she was describing a routine chore. She said she'd attacked Davin first, while he was asleep, stabbing him in the chest. When Neria woke up and screamed, Jamerria said she had to finish it. She chased her daughter into the bathroom and strangled her with a belt. Then came the part that left the room silent. She said she didn't kill them out of hate or rage. She said she did it because the shadows told her to. Hall claimed she'd been hearing voices for weeks, voices warning her that her children were in danger, that something was coming for them. She believed the only way to save them was to free them from this world. Her statement was chillingly coherent, but entirely disconnected from reality. By the end of the interrogation, she had given a full confession. She signed it, folded her hands, and asked, "Can I sleep now?" That night, as her mugshot circulated through Baltimore, people struggled to understand how a woman who'd just gotten her children back could commit something so horrifying. But in the courtroom that followed, the question would shift. It wasn't did she do it, everyone knew she did. The question became, was she even in control of her own mind when she did? After her arrest, Jamerria Hall was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, first-degree assault, and reckless endangerment. The charges were clear. The evidence was overwhelming. The confession, chillingly direct. But even from the start, detectives and prosecutors sensed this case wasn't going to be straightforward. This wasn't a story of greed, jealousy, or revenge. It was something deeper, something broken. At her first court appearance, Jamerria seemed detached from reality. She looked around the courtroom like she didn't know where she was. When the judge asked if she understood the charges, she nodded slowly but didn't speak. She wasn't crying, she wasn't angry, she was just empty. Her public defender requested a competency evaluation, and the court agreed. Over the next several months, 3 independent psychiatrists examined Hall, not just to assess her mental state at the time of the hearing, but to determine her condition at the time of the murders. Their findings painted a devastating picture. Each evaluation reached the same conclusion. Jamerria Hall was suffering from untreated schizophrenia with paranoid features. The illness had likely been developing for years with clear warning signs. Her isolation, her paranoia, her hallucinations, the voices she described hearing since the fire in 2018. But the most critical point came when the psychiatrists agreed that, during the killings, Hall was in the midst of an active psychotic episode, completely detached from reality and unable to comprehend the criminality or consequences of her actions. In other words, she wasn't just unstable. She was profoundly ill. The findings were presented in court in early 2022. After reviewing the psychiatric reports, the judge made a decision that divided the public. Hall was declared not criminally responsible, Maryland's version of the insanity defense. Instead of being sent to prison, she was committed indefinitely to a state psychiatric hospital, where she would receive long-term treatment and evaluation. For many in Baltimore, it was a ruling that sparked outrage. How could a woman who confessed to such horrific acts avoid prison? How could anyone look at those 2 small coffins and say justice had been served? But mental health advocates pushed back, arguing that the tragedy wasn't born of evil, but of a system that failed to recognize a collapsing mind until it was too late. Debbie Levi, from the Maryland Public Defender's Office, spoke publicly about the case. This was a tremendously serious and tragic case. We're grateful the court recognized the depth of her illness. What Jamerria needed most, years ago, was help, not handcuffs. Still, that truth was hard to swallow for those who'd loved Davin and Neria. Their family sat in court that day, stunned. Some cried quietly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. For them, the words, "not criminally responsible," felt like an erasure, as if their children's lives had been measured against a diagnosis and found less worthy of justice. But the court's decision also exposed something the city couldn't ignore, that this was never just about one mother. It was about every gap, every blind spot, every unchecked warning sign that had allowed this tragedy to unfold. And when the judge's gavel fell, it didn't close the story. It opened a far more difficult one that questioned not only what Jamerria had done, but how the entire system had failed to stop her. The story of Jamerria Hall didn't end in the courtroom. If anything, that's where it truly began to unravel, not as a case about one mother's madness, but as a mirror held up to every broken system meant to protect children like Davin and Neria. When investigators and journalists began piecing the story together, they discovered a chilling truth. Hall's descent hadn't been invisible. It had been documented by schools, hospitals, child services, and the courts. The problem wasn't that no one knew. It was that no one ever connected the dots. After the 2018 fire, Child Protective Services opened an active file on the Hall family. For a time, it looked like someone was paying attention. Caseworkers visited the children while they stayed with relatives. Reports noted concern about Hall's mental stability. But by the time she finished her jail sentence and requested custody again in 2019, those warnings had faded into bureaucracy. The CPS report presented at her custody hearing was shockingly incomplete. It listed her compliance with parenting programs and anger management but left out the psychiatric red flags that had been recorded during her hospitalization at Johns Hopkins. There was no mention of her auditory hallucinations. No note about the missing follow-up treatment. It was, as one child welfare expert put it, a report built for paperwork, not protection. When Hall regained custody, she should have been placed under strict monitoring, home visits, counseling check-ins, medication management. But that never happened. And by the time the COVID-19 pandemic hit in early 2020, what little supervision existed was reduced even further. In-person visits were replaced by rushed phone calls or virtual check-ins, brief, impersonal, and easily manipulated. Caseworkers, buried under impossible caseloads, were forced to triage families in crisis. Hall didn't seem like a priority. She said she was fine, and on paper, her case was closed. Inside that vacuum of oversight, her mental state deteriorated in silence. School systems failed too. Teachers had noticed that both children's attendance was inconsistent even before the pandemic. Their absences increased, and when online learning began, their participation all but vanished. No welfare check was initiated. No red flag was triggered. And the healthcare system? It had seen her impotence. In November 2020, Jamerria visited an emergency department for psychiatric symptoms. But there's no record of follow-up treatment. No medication management. No therapy. Just another discharge slip in a system that had already lost her years earlier. Every institution, from the justice system that gave her leniency, to the schools that saw her kids disappearing, to the health professionals who treated her symptoms but not her illness, operated in silos. Each held one piece of the puzzle, but none saw the picture as a whole. By the time Davin and Neria were murdered in August 2021, the tragedy was no longer a mystery of how it happened. The question was why no one stopped it. Professor Raymond Jackson, a child welfare policy expert at Johns Hopkins University, later described it best. Each system had information that could have saved those children. But there was no bridge between them. No communication. What we saw wasn't just a failure, it was fragmentation that turned fatal. For the families who live in neighborhoods like Coventry Homes, this realization hit hard. The tragedy wasn't just Jamerria's. It was theirs too. A warning that the safety nets we trust to catch the vulnerable are full of holes big enough for entire families to fall through. And while Jamerria Hall now sits in a psychiatric facility, treated, medicated, watched, the two children who needed protection the most will never grow up to see the help their mother finally received. In the quiet aftermath of it all, the apartment at 1106 Coventry Homes stood empty. The toys were gone, the laughter erased. The neighbors still walked those same hallways, but something lingered there, an invisible weight that refused to leave. And in that silence, Baltimore asked the same question we're still asking now. How could this happen? Because the truth is, it didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, piece by piece, while everyone looked away. A mother cried for help in ways no one understood. A system shuffled papers instead of saving lives. Neighbors heard the screams and did nothing. One voice, one phone call, one moment of intervention. Any of those might have changed what came next. Davin and Neria Thomas never had the chance to grow up. They never got to start another school year, make new friends, or live the life they deserved. Their names should have been on attendance sheets, not case files. In the days after their deaths, reporters stood outside the building as the sun set behind it. Candles flickered on the sidewalk. Stuffed animals piled up by the entrance. And taped to the front door was a single sheet of paper, written in a child's handwriting. "We miss you, Davin and Neria." It was a reminder that behind every tragic headline are children who once smiled, laughed, and trusted the world around them. And yet, this story doesn't belong to Baltimore alone. It belongs to every community where warning signs go unreported, where stigma silences mental illness, and where systems fail to see people as more than numbers in a file. If you suspect a child is in danger, if you hear something, see something, feel that something's not right, don't wait. Don't assume someone else will call. You could be the difference between intervention and tragedy. For immediate help, contact your local authorities or reach out to the National Child Abuse Hotline. Because sometimes, the most powerful act of love is the courage to step in. The deaths of Davin and Neria Thomas are more than a story of loss. They are a warning, a plea for awareness, a demand for compassion, and a reminder that silence can kill as surely as violence does. As the candles outside Coventry Homes eventually burned out, one truth remained. The echoes of those children's voices, faint, frightened, and pleading, will never completely fade. You've been watching The True Crime Shadow, where we look into the darkness not to glorify it, but to understand it. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and tell us what lessons you believe society still needs to learn from tragedies like this one. And remember, behind every quiet door, every struggling family, there might be another story like this waiting to be seen. Stay aware, stay compassionate, and never stop asking questions. Because even in the darkest crimes, the truth still casts a shadow.